I'll begin this last session of our two-day meeting, which was short and long. And so before we go on to the scientific session, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of you, in fact, for participating, all the people who came from outside, gave lectures, people from here also who gave lectures. It was absolutely great. I'd also like to introduce you and thank our staff. This is Deepali at the extreme right. This is Mukesh Dodain. I don't know your name. Smita is a new person who's joined. Thank you. Okay, Smita, Jiva, Chinmay, and Abhijit. So I'd like to thank them for taking care of everything very, very smoothly. Thank you very much. Yeah, okay, good. Okay, so I will now like to start the scientific session, and after great persuasion, Ashok has agreed to say a few words, give some of his ideas about this very important problem of information paradox, information retrieval. So Ashok, may I invite you?
Unfortunately, I have zero information. Okay, so I'll just take 5 minutes to explain some of the ideas that we have been trying to pursue with Siraj. I mean, I have been talking to Siraj, but
the horizon here.
Okay, but the information I should warn you is zero essentially. Okay. So we are trying to understand what could be the black hole final state. That suppose after the black hole has evaporated completely, right? How are the so the final state should be pure, but how is it purified? Okay. So our idea was the following: that imagine that we have the final state Hawking radiation, okay, and each Hawking quanta say carry a pair of spins are sitting here. Right? So these carry some degrees of freedom, and what you are saying is that these degrees of these information about these states are duplicated in the momentum quantum numbers of the Hawking quanta which are coming out here. Right? So you still need complementarity because the information is duplicated, but the information from inside could emerge outside radiation.
And then maybe with a concrete calculation you could check whether there's enough to gather that information and fall in.
Yeah, that's right. And for infalling observer can actually gather all that information and discover a contradiction of the kind that it talks about.
Sorry, I did not follow on. So you are going to put boundary condition at r is equal to 0, right?
See, effective boundary condition. The point is, you can put some boundary condition r equal to 0, but the effective boundary condition at here, right, will be affected by all of these matter particles which are sitting here, right? Where total mass that this carries of the black hole mass.
Right.
Okay. So we are thinking in terms of some boundary condition equal to 0, but you can think of this as a collective effect, right, of all of the ingoing quanta which is sitting here. Right, and that's why the effective boundary condition at r equal to 0 that you put. That's just to decide, for example, the momenta is quantized in units of even units of 1 over r or odd units of 1 over r, right? Like whether they have sine or cosine waves.
Okay.
That could be controlled by the state of all the quanta which are sitting here, all the ingoing quanta.
Sorry, just to make sure. So from here, you only conclude that either n even or n odd, right?
Depending on the spin of these.
Depending on the spin of
right?
it.
The Hawking quanta could be emitted as n even or n odd, right? That's how you establish the correlation, and these are correlated with the spins of the early Hawking radiation, right? Because we know these are perfectly entangled with the spins which have already been emitted. And now you are saying that these spins now control the momentum of the later radiation, right? And hence the entanglement which was there between these spins and the early Hawking radiation, it transfers this into an entanglement between the momentum quantum numbers of the radiation which is coming out here, okay, and the early Hawking radiation.
How does that the spins inside, with the momentum degrees of freedom outside of
the point is that look at the entangled state that is written. it's written as a product state where the momentum quantum numbers of these are in correspondence to the momentum quantum numbers of these. Right? So if you can change the quantization rule of the momentum here, right, that will also affect the momentum quantum number which is emitted here. See, normally you think in terms of continuous momentum, right? You do integral over.
So you're saying because all of these are little entangled pairs in the momentum, like Cooper pairs or something.
That's right, yeah.
I see.
Right? So when you write the final entangled state, right, the entangled state is going to interior and now exterior.
So if it is even inside, it has to be even outside.
Something, yeah, exactly. Again, I mean, it's a very vague idea, right? I mean, we are talking about doing this in a time-dependent background, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
I mean, it's not eternal black hole that whose background we are trying to do this calculation.
But you are assuming that it's just past the page time, so that it's still adiabatic or something.
Well, we are not even assuming this is just past the page time, because this is a continuous process, right? As soon as these things start forming, right, in principle, it can start transferring information in this long-range quanta.
Yeah.
Okay? The most of the information comes out at page time or later, right? But this process could start happening even earlier.
Because you are trying to set the calculation up on nice slices, you can hope to take into account the back reaction of the horizon, I think.
Yeah,
That's
exactly. Yeah. Right, because nice slice, it's nice, I mean, space-like slice, but it contains, it includes all the earlier ingoing quanta on that slice, right?
Radiation.
Well, not really. I mean, this is, I don't know exactly what one means by encoding, because this is a long-range information, right? This information is not coming out it's not localized in time, right? It's coming, because this is, see, the difference in moment, I mean, what is the difference between even n and odd n here, right? If you look at the two wave functions, right? Wave functions look exactly identical in a small, over a small range of distance, right? If you look at the order of our page, right, then the tail of the wave function, the correlation between the tail of the wave function and the front of the wave function is changed depending on whether n is even or odd, right? So this is a highly delocalized way the information is coming out, right? You cannot say that it's coming out either early or late.
Okay. Thanks, Ashok. Thank you very much for. I wanted to now invite Surat to give a very brief presentation of this Tomita Takeshaki theory. Just what you very brief.
I have also very few things to say. So, morning I gave you this construction of these, these tilde operators, and let me just remind you what that was. And then I just want to mention a connection that we seem to have found to a mathematical theory that we don't understand well enough yet. So this is very preliminary, and maybe if there's something people have to say, that will be very useful. So let me just remind you, we had this toy model, and the description of these tildes was that, I gave you a particular state, and I said that AP tilde on psi was e to the minus beta omega p, AP dagger on psi. I hope I have the factors right. Let me just see if I have the minus factors right. Yeah, me beta over 2, and I hope I also have the signs correct. Right. Yeah, I think I do have the signs correct. Yeah, beta omega p over 2. And the second rule was that, AP tilde acting on any other product of these APs, which I'll call A psi is equal to A into. So, using these two rules, we were able to construct these tilde operators, and as long as you took this A to be in an algebra that wasn't too large, you could construct these state-dependent operators that commuted exactly and that resolved a lot of these AMPS issues. Now, I want to mention just very briefly, as I said in the morning, that this seems to be related. I'm again saying seems to be related because we really don't understand this very well, to this thing called the Tomita-Takesaki theory, which is something in the theory of von Neumann algebra. So the way this Tomita-Takesaki theory goes is as follows. So you take they want to consider some abstract state psi and some algebra, which I'll call A using the same notation as I had above. This was an operator here. Here it's an algebra. I can put curly A or A hat or whatever. And the state psi has the following properties, if I'm getting the terminology right. This psi is what's called separating, which means that for all x belonging to this A hat, x and psi is not equal to 0. So you can't annihilate psi by acting with a state of this kind. Then psi is also what's called cyclic, which means that if you look at the set of all states formed by acting with the algebra, okay, this is dense in the Hilbert space. So I want to mention that if you take some state psi, any state psi in a quantum field theory, and you take just a set of operators local operators that live in some bounded patch, not operators that live everywhere else, they would satisfy this property. If I just give you operators in a little patch that correspond to state is stable, I can't use those operators to annihilate a state because I can't construct an annihilation operator. Not even the vacuum. And it's true that these constructive quantum field theorists will prove to you that in fact by using these operators you can construct something that's dense in the Hilbert space. So you start with some state psi that obeys these assumptions. Okay, I apologize again for this heavy mathematical terminology. As I said, it's partly a result of the fact that we don't completely understand this stuff yet, but we think it's really intriguing that we have a construction that looks very similar to this. Okay, once you have this, you also consider the following antilinear map, okay, which has the property that x on xn of psi, where xn, I remind you, is some element of this A, is equal to xn or adjoint on psi. Okay, so it's an antilinear map that takes a vector where you act with xn and psi, and it takes it to xn adjoint on psi. Okay. Now this map has an adjoint. The adjoint for antilinear maps is defined.
S is an operator in the Hilbert space.
It's an antilinear operator. It's an antilinear operator. So that's why it maps it to the adjoint. So if I put I here, you'd get a minus sign there. It's not a linear operator in Hilbert space. Okay. Then you can also define S adjoint, and S adjoint is.
A map with all the operators, that Sxn is an operator that acts on the original Hilbert space. Because that's what you would want, presumably, right?
Actually, I think that so I'll tell you how it acts on the operators in a minute. But I think this is how the map is defined. I think the map is defined with reference also to a particular state psi that has these properties.
Okay.
So as far as even in the mathematical theory, they define it with respect to this. And then they ask questions about how much this map depends on the state psi, and there's some discussion of this Korn's cocycle. No, I really mean Sxn is equal to xn adjoint. It acts on the vector xn and it gives you xn adjoint psi. S psi is equal to psi. S psi is equal to psi. Because adjoint of 1 is 1. So S psi is equal to psi. Okay, good. Now, S adjoint for antilinear maps is defined the following way. So, the bracket notation is not so good for this, but S adjoint on V is given as U SV star, which is the opposite of what you usually talk about. So this is how you define the okay. Now given these two guys, you can also define the operator delta is equal to S adjoint S. Okay. And this operator actually delta is some Hermitian and positive operator, and this is a linear operator acting on the Hilbert space. Okay. I'm really I apologize again for this terminology. Then additionally you define an operator J, which is given by delta half on S. This is also an antilinear operator. Okay, now after all this notation is done, these tildes that I talked about are in fact defined in a very simple way. Okay. So the mathematicians really consider this object, J, X, and J, where J has, S is some universal kind of map, which just maps things to its adjoint. Okay. And then they consider this map which is J, X, and J. And you can prove with some effort that in fact it's true that xn tilde commutes with ordinary operators xp. If you use the
So this S is defined once and for all, or it's defined for different size, different S?
so I think they start with the state psi and which has these properties, and then you define S. I
I
don't
see.
think they know how to define S on the full Hilbert space per se.
Okay.
And in
okay.
fact there is some
So in this definition, S acts on the whole Hilbert space, but the S satisfies that property
for
for
things that
that
are built up on
particular
the state
site.
psi.
Yeah.
And in fact, it does act on the whole Hilbert space because x and psi is dense on the whole Hilbert
Yeah.
space. So you can construct anything in the whole
Okay.
Hilbert space by acting with this algebra, but it satisfies this property on the
I see.
particular.
Okay.
Now, with some effort, you can show because antilinear operators are hard to deal with, but with some effort, you can show that xn tilde in fact commutes with the ordinary operators.
And such an S operator always exists.
It's a definition, so I think you can always define it to be this. You know, I'm just defining S to be to have this action. So I think you can always define it to have this action.
It's state dependent, but
It's state dependent. In fact, there's a detailed discussion of what the state dependence means. It's called the Korn's cocycle, the issue of the state dependence. And I think, as far as I understand, this thing that was proved by Korn, is it Korns or Korn? Korn, the Alan Korn, Korn, whatever. Korn. So the thing that was
that's Alan Korn.
Alan Korn. The thing that was apparently proved by him was that this operator is state dependent. It's, you know, you take a different state, you get a different operator. But there is some invariant property of this. There's some which he tried to classify, which we don't understand yet. Okay, so as I'm saying, all of this is tentative because, you know, we don't understand. Hopefully in a week or so we will, but right now we don't. So I'm just trying to tell you what. Which-
Just one last,
yes.
I know you have to go on, but is it unique? You know, it doesn't look like it. It seems like there's
This-
a fair amount of leeway. to
This
it.
S, this is unique, I think. This is unique. It's a definition. This is a
But
definition.
couldn't you have many S's which, as far as psi is concerned, does this?
I don't think so.
If xn size dense, right?
But for a particular psi, it is acting like that, not
For a
for
particular
another.
psi.
For all xn's and
For all
particular
xn. So I take
But
the
you're
psi
saying-
and I act with any xn where xn belongs to A.
Okay, thank you.
X and psi span the whole Hilbert space, and I get these. So there's a definition. I think it's a unique definition. You can ask how this S is as some operator in the full Hilbert space. I think that might depend on the state psi. Okay. Now you define these operators, and you can, as I said, you can prove that they commute. Roughly, the reason they commute is, you know, because of this antilinearity of the map. Now, if you have an antilinear map of this kind, you act with some operator on some set of operators here. The antilinear map, you know, flips them over and gives you an adjoint. And then this flips them over once more and gives you an adjoint. So you get back the same operators within xn. You have to be a little careful about this factor of delta. Okay. But you know, it's very easy to show you that S, for example, you know, creates the commuted. Because you act with, you know, you take some operator like this. This is not the operator I have. You have to be careful about this delta, and it's a little tricky. But you can see that S, you know, flips over xp dagger. So this gives you S xn xp dagger psi. And then you act once more, and you get, you know, xp xn dagger psi. And in fact, this is just xp s xn psi, s psi, with the provision that s psi is 1. Okay. So in fact, you can see that this antilinear map does generate the commutant. And you can show with this factor of delta also that it generates the commutant, if you treat the factor of delta carefully. Okay, good. Now, surprisingly, with this factor of delta, if you just take this factor of delta and you work it out in this simple example that I gave you of this toy model, you in fact find that you know, this. So you know, let me remind you that as a result, J acting on. So let's say I take. Let me now convert this discussion to the discussion of the toy model that I had. Okay, so I had a toy model. I had some set of operators A, and this wasn't. You know, this operators I can't take to be the set of all operators in the theory. Because if I take it to be the set of all operators in the, so let me remind you once again, I had a toy model which had these operators AP dagger, and NP. Okay. If I take the algebra formed by all these operators, then the state psi I was talking about in the morning is not, you know, it's not a separating state. In that because, you know, I can annihilate it by acting with an order of n number of these operators. Okay? But nevertheless, let me restrict to a smaller subset of products of operators, which is not actually a closed algebra. Okay? Let me restrict to a smaller subset of products of operators, which is exactly the same subset I was restricting to in the morning, where you take products of up to say k operators where k doesn't scale with n. If you take products of k operators where k doesn't scale with n, that acting on psi gives you some Hilbert space H. And indeed, this vector psi is separating for, you know, this subset of operators, and it's cyclic in that space S. So let's say we take A hat to be product of up to k operators.
But really there A had to be an algebra.
No, I don't think the closure doesn't appear in the proof of the theorem. They do, the quantum field theorists, when they do it, they really take A hat to be an algebra, but the closure doesn't appear in the theorem. Now, maybe it is important in some subtle thing,
Okay.
but this is how we see the link between what we are doing and what they're doing. So the closure, as far as we know, as far as we can see, doesn't appear in the theorem. So this A hat is not a closed algebra, clearly, but anyway, it's I can take it to be a set. And with respect to this set, I do get, I can think of the state H formed by A hat and psi, and by definition, this psi, this vector psi, and with this algebra A, this set is dense in this Hilbert space H, and it's clearly separating by, because I demanded that I had only up to k operators, and as I showed you in the morning, you can't annihilate the state with up to k operators. Good. Now you can work out what this operator delta is. In fact, let me work out what this operator delta is, and let me show you it in fact gives you exactly these right factors of e to the minus beta omega. Okay? The fact that you get this AP dagger is obvious. It's obvious from the map. Okay? Now you might say, what does this have to do with physics? This is just some antilinear map that's mapping xn to xn dagger. Okay? But surprisingly, if you work out this factor of delta, you actually also get this e to the minus beta omega by 2, right? Which is something that's surprising, which I now want to show you. And that's really surprising. How does this adjoint map, and you construct some complicated things, and how does it know about this thing about the temperature? But it does, as I now want to show you. So let me consider this operator delta in the state. I can prove it for you more generally. But let me take the state formed by acting with AP on psi. Okay? And let me consider the expectation. Let me define chi equal to AP on psi. Okay? And let me just look at the expectation value of this operator delta in the state chi. I'm just going to show you how a certain matrix element works out the right way. In fact, you can show that generally it works out the right way. Okay, so this is just equal to, chi into S dagger into S, with an AP dagger and AP on psi. Okay, so this gives you, I can go here. So this just gives you, actually this is still the inner product of chi on S dagger on A dagger of psi. So this is just the inner product of chi with S dagger on AP dagger of psi. Okay? I use the definition of S there. Now I had a definition of the inner product which tells me that I need to flip these things around. Okay? So this is actually given by AP dagger on psi with S acting on chi, and I've flipped these things about. Okay? Because of the definition of the, remember, because there's a star here. Okay? But S acting on chi, is again just gives me back AP dagger. So this is in fact nothing but psi into AP dagger on psi. Okay? Now this is something which is interesting. This is something you can compute, and in fact this guy is just 1 by 1 minus e to the minus beta omega p, the expectation value of this guy, in a state psi which is close to the thermal state, is just the expectation value of the number operator plus 1, which is this guy. Okay? So the expectation value of delta in this state is this. Okay? But there's something else I need to do to get the right matrix element, which is I need to divide by the norm of this state. Right? But the norm of this state, which is chi, is in fact given by, it's the thing with the other way around, AP dagger AP psi, which is just e to the minus beta omega p by 1 minus e to the minus beta omega p. Very good. So now if I look at the matrix element of chi divided by, as a result, if you look at this, where should I go? Maybe this is a very nice drawing, so I won't erase it. So if I look at chi delta of chi divided by chi, which I need to do, you see it's exactly e to the minus beta omega p by 2. It's e to the minus beta omega p, and once I add in this delta to the half factor, I get exactly this rule that we are discussing. Okay? Now this to us is rather surprising. We don't know why it works. We can show, so I calculated a particular matrix element for you. In fact, we can show delta has the right behavior as a matrix. And so somehow there is this object that there's this seems to be apparently quite a large topic in this constructive field theory business. And there's this thing that these people talk about, this Tomita-Takesaki theory, which a priori seems to have nothing to do about physics. You know, how can this delta know about the temperature and know about the Hamiltonian and so on? But somehow it does. Somehow we get exactly the same rule that I was talking about in the morning. So this is all I have to say right now. It seems to be a very interesting connection, and we'd like to explore this more. But there is this subject in mathematical quantum field theory, which seems to have a very close relation. And we don't actually understand the motivation. You know, why were they considering these kinds of things, and how does the adjoint map know about the physics? But somehow it does. Okay, and that's all I want to say about this.
I think Dilip, since you will be leaving before others, maybe you can just briefly wrap up that and part. That and part.
Okay, so let me get back to the black hole problem. So the proposal basically that they have is that black hole is a quantum storage device. And Hawking radiation is basically the error. So that is the kind of point of view that they want to take. So what they want to do is to basically look at this evolution operator U that we looked at. So let me write down that evolution operator again. So this is Cn tensored with so this is the late radiation states, and this is the operator which they want to call error operator. They really want to call it error super operator really. Okay. So super operator is actually a map from a density matrix to another density matrix. Okay, but along with it being a linear map, or it's a linear operator, apart from it being linear operator, it also maintains unitarity. Okay, so so now the thing is that, like, as I was trying to explain in that example of the error correction thing, that you actually have a small data set, and then you have multiple copies of that, not clone, but like just to keep store data. So what you do is that you, out of entire Hilbert space, you find out a small Hilbert space, which is a code Hilbert space. Okay, and it is a code is the one where you basically want to run this error correcting procedure. So you write down some states I bar which belong to this code Hilbert space, and this Hilbert space is much smaller than the full Hilbert space, and you want to ask a question whether you can use this operator within this Hilbert space to correct the do the quantum error correction. So now the necessary and sufficient condition for error correction is the following, that for any pair of operators, say Cn and Cm, and a pair of states, say I and j, so maybe I bar and j bar, the following statement should be true. So Cm dagger Cn J bar, okay, should be equal to Wn delta Mn delta I bar J bar. Okay. And this is kind of a relation that we obtained when we looked at the unitary operator acting on state I times 0b. Okay. That gave us something something like that. Okay. Maybe J. Okay. And then unitarity of this basically gave us a equation of that kind. Okay. So, but the difference is that like this kind of condition that we had defined on the larger Hilbert space works for all black hole states, whereas this kind of condition should only work here in a code Hilbert space where you want to carry out error correction. So, so the procedure for error correction is the following, that you write down an operator which so error correction procedure is following, that you write down an operator R which or rather Rn, which is like this, square root of Wn summation over I okay. And what one defines is define an operator R hat and define some ancillary space, say NA, where it is generated by some operators A dagger A, and it is basically isomorphic to this state B that we have been writing down here, NB. So basically it is just a copy of that one, but with another pair of creation annihilation operators. Okay. So we basically have a new isomorphic Hilbert space HR tilde, which is basically isomorphic to late radiation. Okay. And then you write down this R hat as an operator acting on a state J times state 0 belonging to the this ancillary space, and you write that as summation over n Rn times okay, and then use these two operators, the U operator and the R operator, to write down.
So this ancillary space is something which is part of the black hole system, or?
No, this is completely new. So in some sense you can think of this as something which is living on the other Rindler wedge. Okay. So it's so you
Gotcha.
what you the purpose of doing this is the introducing this is to do the following, that the black hole states are entangled with the with this radiation. So you introduce this new Hilbert space. Sorry, this is B. You introduce the new Hilbert space A, and then you kind of transfer the entanglement from between this to entanglement between Na and Nb.
Okay. But you couldn't have thought of the ancillary space as the early radiation?
No, early radiation is in the same space, right? It's in the same Hilbert space. So what one is trying to do is to basically do a thermophile double here.
I see.
So idea is to write down an operator which is like R hat U acting on J, say I 0A 0B, giving you summation over N NA NB J with some coefficients, some RM Cn kind of thing. Okay. So now this is a completely entangled state of ancillary Hilbert space with the late radiation. And then you can identify this state with a little bit of massaging of this expression, which gives you some omega Wn kind of thing, which is the Boltzmann weight kind of piece. You can write that as a Unruh vacuum. And so the purpose of doing that is to purify the internal states of black hole, transfer the entanglement between the ancillary state and the late radiation. And so once you do that, then you could basically.
Sorry, the whole state ancillary, late radiation and black hole is pure together. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. But
The entanglement with the early radiation has gone away, is it?
no, early radiation is gone away. Yes.
But the full state, including the ancillary system, is pure.
Yeah, because this is maximally entangled and this is purified.
Then ancillary isn't it a way of mimicking the early radiation?
Yeah, but like it is in the sense, well, one could say that, but like what they are trying to do is to interpret that as the, if you look at the this region, so we are talking about a region of this late radiation here. Yeah, they are talking about thermophile double. They are basically making the R tilde sit here. Yeah.
But if you took a collapsing situation, took the early radiation,
Yes,
and
then everything
manipulated
is on
it to
this side.
form and transfer that entanglement to the second CFT like you do for the bridge,
Yeah.
then more
Yeah.
or less.
If you
this
don't
would be
have this side at all, then yeah, you would have it on the other side. Yeah. But I think in their picture, yeah. So if you have a dynamical this thing evolution of the black hole, probably you wouldn't have the this half, and you would probably write down. Yeah. So, but the thing is that like this kind of error operator cannot work on entire system. So what you need to do is to actually make it work on only the subsystem I bar or J bar. Okay. So you construct, you say that your black hole is actually inside the code hill, the code subspace of the full Hilbert space, and then you ask how the system evolves. So, yeah. So what you basically do is that you you say that like R hat U acting on something like I would give you something like summation M n K bar times Cm dagger Cn, and then you get this Ma and Ma kind of states, and then you can use this can do this computation and show that this entire stuff reduces to a state which is like this, which is a state of which reduces to a state like I times the Unruh vacuum. Okay, and this Unruh vacuum is basically summation over n, Na, Nb, using orthogonality of these operators. So you can show that this averaging basically gives you delta Mn in most of the cases when the phases cancel. But there are, but if you are looking at off-diagonal pieces, then most of them will give you a lot of cancellation. The answer won't be 0 in the off-diagonal cases, but at least leading terms would be diagonal, and then there are subleading terms which are of order 1 over square root n, which are off-diagonal pieces. But if you keep them aside, then this answer to leading order would be like this. And that delta, Kronecker delta, you can implement by summing this up. And so this expression is basically like square root of Wm kind of thing, which is the Unruh vacuum. Okay. So the point is that like you would get a Unruh vacuum only if this state belongs to code Hilbert space. Because only on the code Hilbert space that the error correction operator works. If this state is outside the code Hilbert space, then the answer is 0.
So sorry, you just define code Hilbert space again, please.
Yeah.
It is the sum over.
No, code Hilbert space is just a subspace. So this is just a subspace of the full Hilbert space, okay, on which the error correction operator would work. Error correction operator cannot work on entire stuff because you need a lot of redundancy to store the data. Right?
So there is a linear operator which
Yes.
for the error correction operator.
Yes, error correction.
Only acts on a subspace.
It acts only on the subspace, yeah.
Its action on the rest of the Hilbert space is not well defined.
Yeah, it gives you a zero answer.
Oh, so, okay, so it
Yeah.
has non-zero matrix elements inside.
Yeah, so it does error correction only on the code subspace. Now you could, in your full Hilbert space, you can define various other code subspaces with respect to different error correction operators. But once you fix the operator, then its code subspace is also fixed, in which it can do the error correction. Okay. Now, so therefore, this operator itself is not unitary actually, because it works only in a subspace, and whatever are the states within a error within the code subspace, which will evolve, which will have time evolution into other states in the full Hilbert space, they are also part of the story. Okay. So R, the error correction operator acts on those also as a function of time, because it is a time evolution operator, and R could act on that. But nevertheless, it is not acting on the entire stuff. Okay. So therefore, R is not a unitary operator. So one cannot say that it is like a super operator that one would want to kind of use for correcting the errors. Okay. But what one could do is that one could convert that into a projection operator. So one could define operator like pi, which is of the following kind: r hat dagger r hat. Okay. So this is still an operator because it acts both on the ancillary Hilbert space as well as the internal black hole Hilbert space. So you can write this fellow also as Rn dagger Rm kind of thing. Okay. Actually, because of 0, it will basically be diagonal. Okay, and these are the operators acting on the black hole internal Hilbert space. Okay, so they would be acting on H in. Okay. But if R was a unitary operator, then pi would have been proportional to identity, basically. Okay. But because R is not a unitary operator, one can show that this is a projection operator. And the reason is the following: that R hat actually has an action only on the operators, only on the states which belong to the code subspace. So all other states will be kind of mapped to 0, and only the states which belong to the code subspace are the ones which will be picked up. So what one could do is that, like, one could define this and 1 minus pi as two different operators, and one could say that, like, this would give two projection, one on the code subspace and one other one orthogonal to the code subspace. Okay. So what one wants to do now is basically use these operators to construct the internal state of the black hole. Okay. So to do that, one basically makes the assumption that one is looking at a state of the black hole which already belongs to the code subspace. Okay. So we look at rho 0 to be something like summation I bar k bar. Yes.
Where are the code quanta? I mean, what quanta are the code quanta?
Yeah. So in the internal Hilbert space of the black hole, okay, you have a lot of all those states which belong to H black hole.
Right.
Okay. So among those, a subspace is called code subspace, depending upon what is the operator that you use for correcting the error. Okay.
But meaning that, yeah, so what is the meaning? I'm trying to understand what is the physical motivation for this? Not motivation, I mean, where are they, how do I figure out what, are you saying that if I start from some pure state and then I evolve, I do a time evolution,
Yeah.
something, then I would get into some entangled state in which some part of this H black hole gets
Yeah. So let's think of it this way: that, like, you are looking at the black hole being in a state which is part of some subspace of the full Hilbert space. Suppose you define that
Because HPH are defined as a much larger Hilbert.
much larger Hilbert space. So if it belongs to a subspace, and if you say that is a code subspace, then after some point it is going to emit the Hawking quantum, right? When it emits the Hawking quantum, you want to ask a question: can you kind of reconstruct that by using this operator? And if you can, then you know what has gone out.
So what is the minimum that I need to take
That is right. Yeah. So all this computation can be done if you take your state belonging to a specific sector of the Hilbert space and then just monitor its evolution. And then if you have the operator correctly defined on that subset, like it is defined this way, okay. If this I belongs to that subset, okay, if this belongs to H code, then the evolution of all these states in H code, okay, this operator will act on them and correct the information. Okay, so that is basically the rule. Okay, and the way it does this
In principle, it could use all of the
that is
black
right,
hole
but
states.
if it uses all, then you don't have that much information. I mean, typically your code subspace is smaller than the data that is used, right? Even for quantum information. So you wanted to check 2 bits only, 0 and 1, but you still made 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 1 kind of thing, right? So the actual space that you want to do error correction on is smaller than the total stuff that is available to you. Okay. To put it differently, the dimension of H code is much smaller than dimension of full Hilbert space. Okay. If they become proportional, then the error correction is not very efficient. Okay. So I don't think I can.
So you are taken to be much larger anyway, right? Because you saw
It is taken.
all those
Yes, exactly.
testing, yeah.
Exactly. But like you may want to say that like I want to take entire stuff. If I can correct the entire stuff, why not? Okay.
But the code subspace in your definition at t equal to 0 presumably is just H at m equal to E. The E equal to m, the total original energy, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you want to see now
Yeah.
that
So
every
that is
Hawking
still-
quanta is like making an error and you want to recover the original.
Recover that error, yeah. But that is still much smaller than what you would have written down as a full Hilbert space. Yeah.
So if I'm understanding, somehow the idea seems to be that you store the information in some auxiliary Hilbert space, in some ancillary Hilbert space. Where is this ancillary Hilbert space?
So
In the physical world, I mean. In the CFT, it's not there, no?
yeah, in CFT, I mean, at least in the collapsing situation, it's not there. So only way it could be there is the early radiation. That is the only thing which could purify this.
No, but the whole
That's what he was also saying.
point is though that somehow you don't have so much space in the Hilbert space. That's the whole information paradox in some sense. That
Yeah, but like if you give a description in this fashion, this H full Hilbert space is much larger actually.
I mean, somehow the somehow something is being swept under the rug. It seems. I'm not.
I have an even more basic question. I mean, what are they trying to do? If one just wants to have a Hilbert space and have a complicated unitary transformation that preserves unitarity, of course, okay, we can do it. I mean, how are they mapping the physical problem in a meaningful way? Sorry, but in
Yeah.
simple terms into
so
their abstract discussion.
Yes, so actually what they want to do is the following, that they have a system like this. Okay. Well, maybe I should write B here. Okay, so they have a system like this. And there is already entanglement of internal degrees of freedom with the late radiation.
Okay.
Okay. So they want to purify the internal degrees of freedom. So they kind of entangle the outgoing late radiation with other equally big isomorphic Hilbert space.
Yes.
Okay. So once they have kind of purified this thing, then they could ask a question that whatever is the operator that the ancillary space has,
Okay.
whether they can transfer that back into operators defined inside the horizon. Okay. So there are operators here which are constructed out of a dagger. Okay. Can you transfer those two operators which are written here as O tilde? Okay. So they give a prescription of how you convert these fellows into that. Okay. So their basic claim is the following, that they want to introduce this as a kind of auxiliary setup just to purify this Hilbert space for the time being. Then get this, once you have it in fully entangled state, then you could ask a question that operators written in this Hilbert space, whether they could be rewritten in terms of operators in the black hole internal state. If they do,
so just to understand, and then I can stop. if you take the thermofield double state and you evolve it forward using the Hamiltonians of the two CFTs, it is a unitary process.
Yeah.
And okay, we believe we can construct the upper region in terms of operators in the two CFTs,
Yeah.
right? Are they saying that in a very complicated way? I'm sorry, but I mean, must be saying more.
Yeah.
What
So-
exactly?
So if I understand correctly, they are saying the following thing. Suppose you forget about this. Okay, these fellows are almost maximally entangled. Okay,
They are not even, I mean, the upper and the left are not even on the same time. What time?
this is like
Okay,
this
okay,
is
I
like
see, okay.
I
Okay,
and
okay, I got you, I'm sorry, yes, okay.
this.
So
this
they are
fellow.
maximally entangled, okay.
So what you do is that you introduce another Hilbert space, transfer this entanglement into the other one,
Okay,
and then next time around what you do is that you transfer from the ancillary space back into this one. Okay, but in the process you try to give a description of operators in the internal Hilbert space, okay, for which they didn't have any description. Well, what they are trying to do basically is that somehow they want to get operators which in the ADS CFT picture can have an interpretation of operators inside the horizon.
they are actually trying to
But-
do what Suvrat is trying to do in a sense.
They are trying to do that, but like they
they,
once in a while they will say ADS CFT, but otherwise they wouldn't do it actually. So the entire computation is basically yeah. Yeah. So basically, no, basically that is the point.
But I mean, it will be useful if you can summarize exactly what criteria they will use to determine whether the horizon is smooth or not. Because
Yeah.
that seems to be the relevant issue, right?
Yeah. So
I mean, this looks very complicated, but eventually they must have used some criteria to.
yeah. So let me give you one example where they basically show that horizon is smooth if they do this kind of stuff. So yeah. So let us consider this particular thing. So they have rho I k. So notice, so this is a state, this is a density matrix which is where one already assumes that the black hole is inside the code subspace. I bar, J bar are something which is in the code subspace. Okay. So, and what we want to do is basically do the time evolution of this. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So that's what so let me kind of. Yeah. So, yeah. So let me write down two equations so that like I can at least give you a picture of what is happening. Okay. So you want to get the operators that you would define in this region. Okay. So let me just call this O tilde. Okay. So the O tilde are written in the following way. This belongs to the ancillary space. Okay. And now you want to compute the following expectation value. Trace of rho tau times O tilde, which is the operator across the horizon, and operator B, which is in this region. Okay. Okay, so they want to compute something like this. Okay, and given the definition of operator R, given the definition of unitary evolution operator U, and any specific operator B that you choose, you can show that yeah, so you can show that this computation after a few lines of this manipulation basically reduced to doing the following thing. O A times B in the Unruh vacuum. Now remember, Unruh vacuum has Unruh vacuum is basically like this, NA and NB. Okay, this O basically sees NA and B sees the NB. So computing this vacuum expectation value of these operators in the Unruh vacuum is this computation basically reduces to that. Okay, but this is precisely the vacuum behavior of Minkowski space in the neighborhood of the horizon. Okay, so therefore, if you can compute this expectation value in the Unruh vacuum, then you would say that like the space near horizon is smooth because this computation can be done. Okay, so therefore, if this calculation can be done in the Unruh vacuum for any legitimate operators in A and B oscillator space, okay, then it tells you that this expectation value implies that the horizon is smooth. Okay, so this is if this is finite, implies smooth horizon. Okay, but remember that like all this computation requires them to hold on to this ancillary space to claim that this computation gives you a finite answer. They have been all the time saying that like this ancillary space is artificial construct and has to be removed finally. So then the next step that they say is that like, okay, this is what I get, but I have to finally remove this ancillary space. So I transfer the entanglement from the ancillary space between ancillary and late radiation back into the black hole interior. Okay, and so that they can trace out the ancillary space. But in that process, there is some energy cost, and that energy cost basically, that's what they are trying to argue, that energy cost basically makes this entropy of this state goes up, make it go up. And if the entropy of the internal state goes up, then next time when you try to do error correction, you need bigger code space. And as the code space keeps getting bigger, then the quality of error correction goes down. Okay, so therefore they say that like even if at some point you get a smooth horizon, okay, if you integrate out the ancillary space or trace it out, then you are kind of eventually going to encounter this problem of not being able to correct the error. Okay. On the other hand, if you just keep it, which is what Maldacena does in his eternal black hole example, okay, sorry, I forgot that reference, but in which he keeps this, and in that case he doesn't have a problem. It is exactly the same as what these people are getting. That if you say that the ancillary space is realistic, then there is no problem. But as soon as you try to integrate it out, then you encounter the problem of not being able to correct, not being able to integrate out the ancillary space. That is the basic point.
Okay, I think now Ashok and Dilip will be going away. So, but we can continue for a short while. I had requested Apurva to say a few words about the general theory of quantum computation. Some few remarks, for a very brief remarks, hopefully to
I am an external observer in this meeting, so I can say certain things about quantum information from a background perspective, and I think you should know it in the sense that it helps to put certain boundary conditions on the questions that you can ask and the questions which should be interesting. And this is essentially the quantifications of correlations. All kinds of results are discussed, and they all boil down to calculating some correlations and looking at that behavior and trying to make some inferences from it. The two things which have been discussed, one of them is this strong subadditivity, which classically is just represented in terms of these so-called Venn diagrams. One is system A, the other one is system B. Then there is a union B and A intersection B, and if you count without any correlations, the middle part is double counted and there is an equality, but if there are correlations, then there is a inequality. So that is well understood, and it has been used actually also in quantum information theory to prove lots of different results. So it's a important property, and in particular, if there is a special case where the word strong is, and it is just subadditive. So if you language A, B, and C, it amounts to putting the system B equal to trivial system, one-dimensional system. So there is only relation between A and B. So that is the simplest part to define. The other feature is monogamy, and that is actually the more non-trivial part of the correlations. The generic description is that you have lots of different kind of correlations. All the correlations you can't just boil down to just one number or entropy. You have to have many different parameters to quantify all kind of non-trivial stuff which can occur. And monogamy is actually a much more non-trivial feature than subadditivity, and its definition, which hasn't been given clearly anywhere, but I will define it. It just says that suppose you have two components in the system, one I am calling I, the other one is J. You calculate some correlation between these quantities I and J. There can be many different kind of correlations which can be considered, so you have to define a particular function which will quantify what you mean by correlation. And this correlation sum, when sum not only over J, I is kept fixed. If it is less than infinity, some less than or equal to some constant, then the system is called monogamous. If this bound doesn't exist in the sense that the sum can go all the way to infinity, then the system is not monogamous. Now, what are these correlation functions where the generic features can be just specified? I say you have two parts. You construct a density matrix for it, you find its eigenvalues, and the correlation function is some function of those eigenvalues. There is certain freedom about what function you can choose. Generally, it is monotonic, so you don't want funny things happening. But there are many different possibilities of what functions of eigenvalues can be chosen as a correlation. Now, some non-trivial facts about what kind of this monogamy or correlations depend on. So they will depend on what the fundamental variables of the theory are, what are the interactions between those fundamental variables, and as well as in what background space these fundamental variables are embedded. Everything enters, and there is no simple-minded statement one can write in terms of just entropies. Okay. But the results which are worth knowing are this, that you considered first the classical system just a system of bits. In quantum or more mathematical language, these are Z2 arising variables. And what happens for these systems, monogamy? Answer is no. In principle, you can have lots of spins, you can have these correlations running all the way to infinity, and you perform the sum can diverge. No, this is an infinite system. And the sum can be made as large as possible by enlarging the size of the system. What happens to qubits? In the same language, these are SU2 variables, or if you want StatMech language, these are the Heisenberg spins. And here the answer, it is yes. And the simplest example is a pair of spins which are coupled into a singlet. And when you try to couple them into a singlet, they will decouple from the rest of the world. Okay? No. There is much more simple and interesting case in between. I left a little gap here. And these are the things which are called rebits. And this is the group which is in the StatMech language with the XY model. And what is the answer? Does anybody have a guess?
What is the qubit here? I don't know what rebit is, sorry. I know what qubit is, it's a two-dimensional Hilbert.
Two-dimensional complex Hilbert space.
Correct.
Two-dimensional real Hilbert space.
Oh, not something we do normally in quantum mechanics.
Yes. The answer is no. It's a Hilbert space, but real Hilbert space. And it cannot produce monogamy. So there are now lessons to be learned that you cannot just blindly ask about monogamy without specifying what are the variables of your theory. What are the characteristics of the Hilbert space or equivalency, whatever you are working in, and only then you will see non-trivial features. And in particular thing, there is a problem about how to extend this to field theory.
So just to clarify this, so strong subadditivity holds in all of these.
Yeah.
But then, so you're saying that monogamy does not follow from strong subadditivity.
No.
Right.
Strong subadditivity is a much more general result. It works in all the cases.
And sorry, by no you mean it does not hold, or sorry, monogamy is not defined for bits or rebits, or
Not defined, does not hold.
so should I?
Some diverges. There is no finite bound. You can have configurations where the sum literally diverges.
So it does not give any constant. That's what it is.
Yeah, there is no constraint.
But anything you derived honestly from the strong subadditivity, maybe was called monogamy or something in some of the discussion. Anything derived rigorously from strong subadditivity is fine.
Any calculation in a gauge theory? Gauge degrees of freedom? Like,
That's what I'm trying to say, that beyond this, suppose you want to go to field theory or
Okay.
some other thing. What are the results? So I can make three statements. I don't know. I have not seen anybody trying to do that. That's the second statement. And the third thing is, I won't be surprised if it can go in either way.
Let's say I think of a lattice screen case. So I have a really, and I put an ultraviolet cutoff, so there's finite energy.
These are all defined with respect to discrete systems.
Right. So I can convert my quantum field theory into a discrete system. No? I can think of a UV and IR cutoff, and I have some finite number of operators, in which case monogamy should hold. I mean, what is so subtle about quantum field theory? Why is it not just ordinary quantum mechanics?
It's a statement.
Huh?
It's statement. No. It's a statement about jumping from a finite dimensional system to the Fock space.
So let's put a cutoff on the upper energy so that we have a finite Hilbert
If you
space.
truncate Fock space, you will use unitarity. You don't want to do that.
This seems, I mean, there's a question of whether, you're right that there may be some subtleties in proving it in a very mathematical way, but it seems that at least in any real application, one should be able to truncate the Fock space up to any energy.
As I say, you can make conjectures. I am talking about something which they have been able to prove rigorously. Okay, so these are the kind of statements which Lieb and Mattis will prove. Okay, rigorous mathematical derivations with all bounds, all everything under control. You can jump beyond that. That is possible. I'm not denying that, but I don't know whether anybody has done those things convincingly. In particular, I want to mention some things. For example, the first thing which happened, we are talking here about spins, but just to go to special relativity. You know that the spin does not remain a conserved quantity. It's the total angular momentum which is a conserved quantity in relativistic system. And it's a spin and orbital things are going to mix. And there are pair creations and annihilations and all those kind of things are also which come in. So how will you define these correlations? Pair creation spoils that thing as well. Those are not the question. The one answer which has been used is that I can go to the system of photons. Okay, it's relativistic because there is no non-relativistic limit for photons. But then you have to replace spin by helicity. The genuine spin is not a valid observable quantity for photon. You can still have non-trivial singlets like this pi 0 decaying into a pair of opposite helicity photons. Nothing wrong with it. You can form a singlet. But if you ask me a question, does helicity have a same monogamous property? I will say I don't know. So the group which satisfies helicity dynamics is not one of these.
But just a question, I mean, the way you've written it is actually very nice because it seems to suggest that there could be a bound you could prove really on field theory correlation functions. So I write down a field theory correlation function phi of x, phi of y, and I integrate over y in some sense, and that is something that should satisfy a bound. Maybe the way I said it may be completely wrong, but roughly that's the kind of statement one would like to prove, right? That
But,
the
yeah.
integral of some correlation function is finite.
But I want to say something else, and which is non-trivial in this discussion as well as lots of other parts of quantum mechanics, that the separation here is between real variables and complex numbers. And that is the feature which is responsible for a lot of unusual things, and all the conflicts between unitarity on one hand and principle of equivalence on one hand. If you go down and look deep enough, you will find a conflict between describing a complex system and a real system. In general, for a field theory, you can define a Euclidean analog. It's quite possible. With a lattice QCD background, I have done it lots of number of times. And there are things which remain continuous in that. Spectrum, cross-section, all those things which can calculate. But some things do get lost. And the quantities which get lost between this Euclidean version and the Minkowski version, things like phase shifts, they are the ones which are playing a very non-trivial role in discussion of these correlations. And those are the things which one should really try to address if you want to quantify where the conflict is coming from.
Sorry, let me ask this. Strong subadditivity and conditions on entanglement, I understand trying to directly ask how entangled systems are. But suppose you didn't have the property of, why is this definition of monogamy so important? Let me put it like that.
This
I mean, suppose
strong subadditivity will exist for classical bits also. There is nothing wrong with it.
But I am interested in qubits. My world is quantum mechanical, and I want to know how entangled A and B are. So I measure SA, I measure SB, and I compare it with SAB. I understand why one does that, right? Why do I care about this definition of correlations? Just to understand.
It's a
Okay, but this tells you something about correlations, right? Are the correlations bounded or not? In some definition, I haven't fully understood.
I think if you
But the
want to raise this paradox in say, without using this qubit model of Hawking emission, in some more abstract sense, in terms of really the field theory, effective field theory with black hole background, this might be a very useful way to phrase it. It might be very nice for that. Rather than thinking of this Hawking pair emission and qubits, which is not how it's really happening. Really what you have is some field theory and there's a correlation between one side and the other side. And there also
No, but
between something here and something far away. This might be a nice way to phrase
you don't have to, is what I'm trying to say. You can, if you permit me that you can lattice the field theory and you have a Hilbert space, and if Apurva will allow me to say that for a Hilbert space of that type, strong subadditivity holds, I could use that.
But my point is more that the Hawking emission process is not well modeled by an emission of qubits. When you think of the Unruh vacuum, you really say there's there's some flux, but you don't really. I've never seen this production of qubits really being made very precise. Do you know?
Don't have to phrase qubits. Don't have to. Doesn't have to be phrased in terms of producing qubits. You can just say what is the entanglement of the region inside, the region outside, etc., etc. That only talks about the Hilbert space.
Right, but if you could phrase it in terms of correlators, of say number operator outside, number operator inside.
It's a weaker property manifestly. Strong subadditivity is something that happens all the time in
Okay, no, no,
Otherwise, you're up against whether or not something has this
No,
very
no.
much more refined property.
I will put it different way. There can be all kind of correlations which may not be enough to signify the quantum nature of the system. I mean, in principle, you can do Euclidean gravity and you can derive Hawking temperature and area law of entropy, etc. completely, and that doesn't address the question of quantum correlations at all. It will tell you certain properties that you can derive all those things, but in that derivation you will not see any feature of quantum correlations appearing at all. And so you address this thing, you really have to take a process where you need complex wave functions. And to give a example which is unrelated to these things is the other famous test of quantum mechanics, which has to do with Bell's inequalities. There you can argue about contextuality, locality, and people keep on doing that, but my point of view is different. There the difference is defining the system in terms of a probability measure versus defining a system using a density operator as a weight function. If you want genuine quantum mechanics, you need a system where the density operator is the weight function. If you try to simplify the density operator to probability measure, you will lose something, and Bell's inequality is an illustration of that particular fact. Probability distribution is just a diagonal part of the density matrix. So it's the off-diagonal stuff which is doing non-trivial thing, and that is the part where complex things occur. So the non-trivial features are connected with this complex part, and that is the part you can't get rid of, starting from the fundamental correlator, momentum, commutator with position is equal to I. That I you cannot get rid of, and it's responsible for non-trivial things, and I'm just trying to stress that particular feature of quantum mechanics, which is at root of lots of these conflicts or paradoxes or whatever you want to call that, but that is the feature one should try to understand better. I don't have an answer, but I'm just saying that what are the important part of the questions that you should focus on.
I have another question. We have a plan, but I have another question maybe unrelated topic. There's something which we haven't discussed in this whole meeting, which is this Harlow-Halen argument, quantum computing. I don't know if you're familiar with this. It's the argument that to build a quantum, if you wanted to extract this bit, get this bit from the early radiation, you would have to make a unitary transformation of the early radiation that was a UN unitary transformation. So there's a scale which I'm not sure how relevant it is to the information paradox per se, but I understand it's a nice result in quantum computing, which is that to build a UN matrix out of a quantum circuit actually requires exponentially large circuit. I don't know if you're familiar with this. Apparently within the quantum computing literature, this is something that people like about. I'm not sure this is relevant to information paradox.
It's a kind of trivial statement that if you want to write down n by n matrix and the elements are all unrelated, you need n square space just to write them one by one. And if that n is exponential in terms of number of bits, well, so be it. There is nothing trivial.
It's a trivial. I mean, in the Santa Barbara workshop, there are some people who came from Scott Allenson person, so I seem to be very interested in.
No, the question which is interesting from point of view of quantum computation is that what are the kind of matrices which you can construct with far smaller number of resources. You want to construct an n by n matrix, but you want only log n resources. And the systems for which you can do that, they are the ones which are interesting.
So the black hole does give you a system like this because it produces an S matrix in a time that's, which is e to the S is going e to the S matrix in a time which only scales with it. So in some sense, the natural black hole does give you this kind of Hamiltonian. This is one of the other statements in that paper, right?
Sure. But they probably want to do it in a lab and not go to a black hole and do it.
No, so they say that if you, but anyway, this is I just wanted to know if you had any evidence. It's good. But there's something interesting about that.
And anyway, in particular, properties of so-called real Hilbert space hasn't been studied very much, either by people doing quantum computations or by people doing field theory. Mathematically, there's a lot of
Okay. Thank you, Apurva. Thank you very much. Yeah. He's one of the local experts on this subject, so I thought it would be good for him to say a few words. Okay, so now we are almost at the end. I have a little blurb there, which I wanted to advertise. It's a paper by our colleagues from some time ago, which is a model for black holes in ADS space-time, which can actually Hawking radiate. See, if you have a large black hole in ADS, then it's like a black hole in a box. It's an equilibrium. Hawking radiates but absorbs. So it's not a very good system to study in the boundary theory. But this example is in a boundary theory, and the boundary is R2 cross two circles. One of them is a thermal circle, and there is another spatial circle. And this boundary theory, there are very good arguments why there is a soliton called the plasma ball. And this soliton is stable because you can match the pressure against the surface tension, and if you are just above the critical temperature, this becomes a very nice example to study. This is in the Gauss theory. It's qualitative, but it has some very interesting features that if you study glue ball scattering, then the glue balls more or less just dissolve on the boundary of this. There's a phase boundary. So this is a system in which there are two phases. This is the deconfinement phase, and this is the confinement phase. And there's a phase boundary, and the glue balls basically, because they are made up of n-square partons, for this particular system, very specific system, there's a result which was also derived using ADS-CFT by Polchinski and Strassler, that the energy of the partons is given by this very simple formula, that it is the gap in the system, which is of the order of the inverse ADS radius, divided by the energy. So you have a very high energy object, but it's raised to the power of lambda. And when lambda is very large, it's strong coupling, each bit, each parton in this glue ball is actually very slowly moving. And this implies that when it reaches the phase boundary, it simply dissolves into the plasma ball. Okay? So this is a construction in the Gauss theory. There are lots of thermodynamic checks. There's also a model of spontaneous emission of glue balls, spontaneous emission, which is an order 1 effect, and you can read this paper. It's a short paper, only 60 pages, by the standards of these authors. But the interesting thing is that this system is dual to a localized black hole. So look, in the sense that this is the XY plane, and the other two directions are compact. So this is the XY plane. This is the ADS radius. This is the boundary. So you have a black brane that smoothly goes over into another configuration called the ADS soliton. And this is the correspondence. This corresponds to this. I think this dictionary over here is not very well understood. For example, what are the operators which are sort of in the dual system, describe the plasma in the deconfinement phase? This is a very interesting question, I think. Which, on the other hand, we also have the glue balls, which are dual to gravitons, but the gravitons don't seem to have any structure, at least asymptotically. And so it might be interesting to understand the correspondence of the scattering which I just sort of described. I think this is a nice model, actually. It's a hard model because it's in real four-dimensional field theory. But if we can understand somehow how the physics of this model gets translated into creation of a space-time, and then we can start asking questions about infalling observer and stuff like that. So this is the only model I know in the ADS CFT correspondence in which you can actually talk about Hawking radiation, besides the D1, D5 system, which is much simpler. Okay, I had to say a few things, and I thought that I just mentioned this. I think we just end this meeting on those words, and thank you very much, all of you. Yeah.